My wife wiped out our son's college fund and ran off with her boyfriend. I was crushed until my 10-year-old son grinned and said, "Dad, it's fine. I fixed everything." 2 days later, she called in a blind panic after discovering that part one. I will never forget the day my world crumbled. It started like any other. A mundane Tuesday filled with work emails, Jason's half-hearted attempts at homework, and the familiar hum of the coffee maker in the background. Nothing seemed off. Nothing warned me of the storm brewing in the distance. If I'd known, maybe I would have done something differently. Though in hindsight, I doubt it. Some disasters are inevitable. I was sitting in the living room, scrolling through bills on my laptop when the notification popped up. Your balance has fallen below the minimum threshold. That was odd. The college fund had more than enough in it. 6 years of careful saving for Jason's future. Laura and I had both agreed it was untouchable. It wasn't a conversation we needed to revisit because we both knew how much it meant. Or so I thought. I logged into the account expecting to see some sort of mistake, maybe a glitch. Banks mess up all the time, right? But no. The truth hit me like a freight train. The account was empty. Not low balance, empty. Zero. No transactions in sight. I stared at the screen, the numbers burning into my eyes, hoping, praying. It was a joke. But it wasn't. "Laura," I called, my voice shaky. No response. "Laura," I tried again, louder this time, but the silence that answered was deafening. She wasn't home. That's when the sinking realization crept in. Laura had been acting strange for weeks. Distant, a little too dressed up for her errands, brushing off questions about where she was going with vague excuses. I chalked it up to stress, life, whatever. Never once had I thought. I grabbed my phone and dialed her number. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. My heart was pounding now, every beat thumping in my chest like a drum. Jason wandered into the room, munching on an apple, oblivious to the chaos unraveling before him. "Where's Mom?" I asked, trying to sound calm for his sake. He shrugged, taking another bite. "She said she had to go somewhere." Somewhere. That word felt like a dagger twisting in my gut. My hands were shaking as I opened our joint credit card account. Maybe I didn't want to see what I already suspected, but I couldn't stop myself. And there it was. Transaction after transaction. Flights, luxury hotels, high-end restaurants. My wife was halfway across the country, living it up on money meant for our son's future. I didn't want Jason to see me fall apart, but it was hard. My mind raced with questions. How could she do this? How could she take from our son, from the one person who had nothing to do with our issues? Sure, we'd been arguing lately. Sure, things hadn't been perfect. But this was unforgivable. Jason must have noticed the look on my face because he came over and put a hand on my shoulder. "Dad, it's fine," he said with a smile that was too calm, too knowing. "I fixed everything." At the time, I thought he was just trying to make me feel better. Kids don't understand the weight of betrayal, the depth of loss. They see things in black and white. Good guys and bad guys, problems and solutions. I wanted to believe his words were innocent. But even then, something about his tone felt off, like he knew more than he was letting on. I didn't have the energy to press him. My focus was on Laura. I tried calling again, but it was useless. It wasn't until later that night, when I checked the closet and saw her suitcase missing, that the truth hit me in full force. She wasn't coming back. She had emptied the account, packed her bags, and walked out on her family, on me, on Jason. The anger came in waves, each one more intense than the last. I wasn't just furious at her. I was furious at myself. How could I have missed the signs? How could I have let this happen under my nose? Every transaction, every lie played on repeat in my mind like a cruel movie. I couldn't turn off. Jason stayed quiet most of the evening, watching me with that same calm expression. When he finally went to bed, I sat alone in the dark, replaying the last few months, trying to find answers. But there weren't any. There was just a gaping hole where trust used to be, and a betrayal so deep it threatened to swallow me whole. I'd like to say I found some clarity that night, some resolve to move forward. But I didn't. All I found was the cold, bitter truth. The woman I loved had chosen herself over her family, and there was no coming back from that. What I didn't know as I sat there drowning in my grief was that Jason had already started working on a solution, one I couldn't have imagined in my wildest dreams. The days following Laura's betrayal were a blur. I was barely functional, running on autopilot, consumed by anger, confusion, and heartbreak. But Jason, Jason was unshaken. If anything, he was eerily composed for a 10-year-old whose mother had just abandoned him. He still went to school, still did his homework, still played with his Legos like nothing had changed. At first, I chalked it up to shock. Kids process trauma differently, right? But the truth was, Jason wasn't ignoring the situation. He was working on it. It started small. I'd catch him typing furiously on his tablet, his face scrunched up in concentration. He'd glance at me and quickly minimize the screen, brushing it off with a casual, "Just homework, Dad." I didn't think much of it at the time. After all, he'd always been a whiz with technology. Coding, gaming, whatever. It was his thing. But then there were the whispered phone calls. "Who are you talking to?" I asked one evening, catching him in the kitchen with the phone pressed to his ear. He looked startled, like a deer caught in headlights. Nobody," he said, shoving the phone into his pocket and hurrying out of the room. I didn't press him. I figured he was talking to a friend or maybe even a counselor from school. Everyone handles grief differently, I told myself. Maybe this was his way of coping. Then there was the garage. Jason started spending hours in there, tinkering with tools and wires. I didn't pay much attention at first. I assumed he was working on one of his little engineering projects. He'd always been good at building things. Robots, model planes, stuff like that. But one night, curiosity got the better of me. I wandered into the garage to see what he was up to, and what I found stopped me cold. There was a whiteboard covered in diagrams, equations, and flowcharts. It looked like something out of a spy movie. Next to it was a laptop with lines of code scrolling across the screen. Jason was sitting at the workbench, soldering something that looked suspiciously like a listening device. When he saw me, he jumped up, trying to block the whiteboard with his small frame. "What's all this?" I asked, genuinely baffled. "Nothing, Dad. Just a project for school," he said too quickly, too defensively. I raised an eyebrow. "A school project? Since when does 4th grade require surveillance equipment?" Jason's face turned red, and for a moment I thought he might actually confess. But then he just shrugged and muttered, "You wouldn't get it," before packing up his tools and heading back inside. I stood there staring at the whiteboard, my head spinning. Whatever Jason was working on, it wasn't for school, and it wasn't just a hobby. As the days went on, the strange behavior only escalated. Jason started asking oddly specific questions about Laura's finances. Did she have other accounts? Did I know her passwords? Did she ever talk about offshore investments? At first I thought he was just being curious, but then I realized he was gathering information. "Why do you want to know all this?" I asked one evening. Jason shrugged, not looking up from his tablet. "No reason. Just wondering." "Jason," I said, my voice firm, "this isn't normal. If something's bothering you, you need to tell me." He finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "I told you, Dad, I'm fixing it. You'll see." That night, I couldn't sleep. Jason's words kept echoing in my mind. Fixing it? What could he possibly mean by that? I thought about confronting him, demanding answers, but something held me back. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was a small, irrational part of me that trusted him. Trusted that he really did know what he was doing. The next morning, I found him in the kitchen typing away on his laptop. He didn't even notice me standing there watching him. His fingers flew across the keyboard with the kind of confidence that didn't belong to a 10-year-old. "Jason," I said softly, and he froze. "Yeah, Dad." I wanted to ask him what he was doing, what he was planning, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I just said, "Breakfast is ready," and walked away. Looking back, I should have pressed him harder. I should have demanded to know what he was up to. But part of me didn't want to know. Part of me was afraid of what I might find out. Over the next few days, Jason's behavior became more secretive. He stopped leaving his tablet unattended, locked the garage whenever he was working, and even started covering the whiteboard with a sheet when he wasn't using it. And then, just as I was starting to convince myself that it was all harmless, Laura called. Her voice was frantic, almost unrecognizable. "You need to stop him," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Jason, he's done something. Something terrible. I don't know how, but he's—" The line went dead before she could finish. I stood there, the phone still pressed to my ear, my mind racing. What had Jason done? And why was Laura so afraid? What has Jason been working on in secret? How did he manage to strike fear into Laura, the woman who betrayed us? And what does it mean for our family's future? Stay tuned for part 2, where the truth unravels, and the stakes are higher than ever. Don't miss it. This is a story you won't want to stop watching.